I am officially in the Reason 13 honeymoon phase of music making. You might be the same. A new version of Reason drops, that comes with some new rack devices, and then suddenly they're like all that I use in all my songs for the next 6 months. Thor, Algorithm, Object, my previous favorites suddenly cease to exist for a bit while I just am constantly asking myself, I wonder if there's a polytone bass that would sound good on this. Or maybe I should sidechain the sound. Or, ooh, I can widen the stereo image. And then there's the question at the heart of today's music making task. What musical impact does Ripley Space Delay have on my music? Well, let's find out. Today, I'm simply going to make some music where the only driving inspiration is that I want to try to use Ripley on everything. And along the way, I'll see how thinking about the delay effect during the writing process and not during the mixing or later production actually changes what I write. To get some chords going, I'll bring in a polytone dual-layer synthesizer and I'll put a chord sequencer atop it. You know, there's one chord sequencer preset that has never really made sense to me when I've been spinning through the chord presets and looking for inspiration. It's called Grand Chorus, and it's nice, but it sounds like this. That's just a lot of chords in a quick-fire succession. But I realized recently that it probably works way better if I work at slower tempos that I never use, so I'll cut the tempo in half and see where this gets me. Okay, yeah, well that makes more sense. And I love this chord set's ability to basically embed a melody in the chord voicings themselves. But the timing, it's not quite right. The first place that my musical instinct diverges from the preset is here, where the C chord comes a bit too soon. So I'll go into the chord sequence and I'll adjust the timing to put it on the beat instead of ahead of it. The second part that is close but not quite right for me is this whole cool little sequence of chords. It's doing all sorts of syncopations that I'm hearing differently in my own head. I hear the rhythm more like this, and forgive my singing. Ba 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 ba. Ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-ba. I'll go to town here and adjust all of the timings to match what I'm singing, and I'll even add another chord to the end to make our F chord feel a little extra resolved by adding an F sus2 chord. So now it sounds like this. Since there's so much cool melodic suggestion in these chords, the next thing that my ear hears is another 4 bars that finishes out this musical melodic phrase. And it would be similar to these 4 bars, but, well, different. And I can't say how different, except that I'll know the right choices when I hear them. So I'll go to town constructing 4 new bars to double the length of this chord progression, completing the melodic voice leading in the process. I've also gone into Reason's browser to filter Polytone's presets down to find a dreamy pad sound. Here's what I've got with my full progression and my pad. Okay, so we are off and running. Now let's drop a Ripley Space Delay underneath my polytone and amp up the dreamy vibes on this already dreamy chord progression. I'll reset Ripley so that we can design our own ambience enhancing effect. I do want a stereo dual delay, and for the timing, I'm not 100% sure what the note intervals would be at this slower tempo, but I can feel what I want them to be. On the one side, I want some kind of triplet feel. I never know if it's quarter note triplets or eighth note triplets, or actually sometimes it's neither and what I'm feeling is dotted eighth notes. And if all that means nothing to you, That's just fine, because what matters is the actual feel. And so I'll use the tap tempo button on the left side delay time to tap in the triplet feel, and it will tell me the actual note value. Alright, so it's eighth note triplets. Great. The right side, I want to be more steady and slow. I'm pretty sure that it's just quarter notes on the beat, but I'll verify with the right side delay times tap tempo. Yep, quarter notes. I'm going to activate the feedback filter to sculpt the sound of the delay a bit more for some mid-frequency push, with high and low roll-off. And I'll crunch up the sound a bit using the noise modulation section on Ripley as well. On a pad sound like this, the noise modulation can introduce just a bit more chaos and movement to an otherwise smooth sound. I'll turn the amount all the way up to demonstrate what I mean. But let's dial that back so that it's more of a texture element and not a rhythmic defining quality. And lastly, I'll activate the space ambience section. And I mean, there is no subtlety in mind here. I want a ton of decay, a big ambient size, and a lot of it in my mix. But here's the key thing. I want the ambience to provide the wash to my initial chord while leaving the delayed repetitions free from that ambience. So I'll activate the parallel button. The result of our Ripley effect turns our already nice lush pads into something more worthy of a Sigur Rós starter pack. In fact, if we bypass Ripley, you'll see how much mood and emotion it's adding to these chords that suddenly feels sterile without Ripley. Okay, so let's add to these pads. One thing I find myself wanting to do with delays and with synthetic ambient pads like this is to introduce organic, realistic instrument textures. If I was sticking entirely inside the Reason rack, I'd be headed straight for Object's physical modeling and its uncanny realism and organic instrument layers. But since I play guitar, I'll go even more organic and even more realistic with, well, actual realism. The first thing I want to do is to just enhance the pads I already have in my song, and since this chord sequence has such a strong suggested melody simply from the chord inversions and the choices that I made, I'll use my guitar to simply double that melodic line. Now let's put Ripley into the mix here. And for this one, I'll go to Reason's browser and load a standard 1:2 preset to start off. And now I'm going to add some noise to this guitar, but I'm going to do it for perhaps the complete opposite reason that I used it on my pad chords. On the chords, I wanted to introduce instability and lo-fi degradation to make my sound less polished. But I can actually use noise to make something sound more polished in my mix as well. How, you might ask? Well, for a second, let's think about something that's not even music. Let's think about a bicycle. Yeah, a bicycle. You see, if I'm painting my bicycle, I could paint it yellow, and it'll look nice and, well, yellow. But if I were to introduce some noise to the paint, little flecks of metallic grit that aren't yellow, you know what happens? My pristine yellow bike actually comes across looking even more bold and more sparkly than the pure yellow alone could do. Just like we can use a noise additive on paint colors to evoke some sparkly quality, we can actually use noise on nice pure sounds to make them sparkle more in the mix. Make sense? I'll use the noise modulator and its aerial algorithm, and I'll route this to modulate the incoming signal before it's passed through any other stage of Ripley. I'll also add a bit of the digital distortion as well, also on the input stage. The result, when we play back our guitar against our chords, is a supporting and sparkling enhancement of the melodic lines that I liked in the chords themselves. But okay, we've got dreamy chords made more sparkly with our guitar. But we need something that's offering counter movement, something that's not just all doing the same melodic thing. Since I'm still wearing my guitar, let's add another layer. For this layer, I'm going to drop a Ripley onto the insert path of my audio track while I'm even in the writing part, because the presence of the delay will change what I write and how I play. There's a preset that I like called Coming and Going, which is a simple eighth note single delay, a reverb, some noise, and a feedback filter that's got some custom routing using the modulation matrix, which uses the LFO to move the feedback filter bands around over time. By adjusting the amount of each band assignment, I can determine how much the filter band gets impacted. Having this filter band movement makes my delayed signal have more tonal movement than a steady delay would. So let's record some chords. My performance can include a couple of sparse areas where Ripley will fill in the gaps of my playing. Speaking of filling in the gaps, I've got this shaker sample that I really like, and I think it would be perfect for some Ripley delay. I gotta say, Ripley's default preset called Much Needed Spice is shockingly good at being pretty dang perfect on most things, and this shaker is no exception. It's 90% of the way there already. In fact, the only thing I'd really like to hear it doing that it's not doing is fading out. And not fading out in volume per se, more fading out in its character, or rather, the character of the shaker changing over time to feel less repetitive than a straight ahead echo. So let's modify the preset. It's actually already doing something interesting down in the mod matrix. You can see that the LFO is set to adjust the high cut frequency of our feedback filter. But instead of this random LFO waveform, let's change it to a descending ramp waveform. And let's set the rate to 1 4-beat bar of our tempo. If I turn the amount up to 100, you'll hear that as the shaker repeats, it gets muffled into oblivion. But if we dial that amount back, our repeats will last longer and get muffled, but in a more musically useful and tonally interesting way. We could assign that same ramp LFO to modulate other parameters, like maybe we could route it to the dry-wet control and dial in a small amount so that we hear our space reverb changing as we transition into the muffling part of the shaker repeats. If I wanted even another type of coloration vibe on these shaker repeats, I could drag another effect entirely into the signal path by dragging a pulverizer into the rack with the shift key held down so that it doesn't automatically cable itself. Then I'll flip the rack and wire it up so that the effects send signal goes out of Ripley to the input of pulverizer, and the out of pulverizer back to the effects return of Ripley. Now my delay signal will go through an extra effects stage. I can turn off the squash, turn down the dirt, and dial in some blend of the low-pass filter cutoff, resonance, and tone to give the repeated portion of my signal even more mojo than it had. If we put in some more drums on this, it's worth remembering that one of the great things about delay effects like Ripley, they make even simple things sound cool and complex. I've got some samples loaded up in Oomph Club drums. And I'm programming a basic beat that, don't get me wrong, it sounds nice and basic to lay a pulse onto our otherwise loose, dreamy beat. But adding even a simple 1:2 delay effect using Ripley adds all the syncopation that spices up our beat, along with some ambience befitting of our beat's vibe. With the rest of the tracks, it sounds like this. this point, I'm going to send this idea off to my friend Ben because I'm hearing some fretless bass on this, and to my friend and yours, Sarah Spencer, from mysongclub.com, who has said she would love to try writing a vocal on top of this. And in fact, through the magic of the YouTube content creator power to warp space and time, well, I just got their parts.
Like the rose and the whiskey, the safe place, the old sting, but just starting to bloom with pain still in the room, drunk from a skipped heartbeat. Wish you hadn't met me, glass half empty, but you're still hoping for a better ending for the rose and the whiskey.
Well, Ripley did exactly what I wanted it to. It caused me to make music that I wouldn't have made without it. The influence of Ripley in shaping the parts that I wrote, the way that I mixed this, and the way that other people then wrote their parts can't be overstated enough. Ripley can be as much a songwriting partner and an inspiration for you as it is a simple mix effect. Check out what Ripley can do for you when you push outside of your normal routines and discover that sometimes finding your sound faster means finding an entirely new sound.